A year ago, America fell in love with a singing janitor from Terre Haute.
Oh, Richard Goodall won, you might remember, America's Got Talent.
A man in a gray uniform pushed a mop across a middle school cafeteria floor, humming an old rock song under his breath, completely unaware that a phone in a student's pocket was already recording the moment that would rewrite the rest of his life. He did not know it yet, but the janitor humming to himself between lunch periods was about to become one of the most talked about voices in America. 2 years later, he would be handed a golden buzzer, a national title, and a level of attention he never once chased. Now, at 56 years old, Richard Goodall has finally closed a chapter that millions of fans assumed he would never actually close, and the reasons behind that decision reveal far more about who he really is than any 90-second audition clip ever could. Richard Goodall's story does not begin on a Hollywood stage. It begins in Indiana, where he was raised and where he has spent nearly the entirety of his adult life, settling in Terre Haute, a mid-sized city best known for its universities and its unhurried Midwestern pace. There was nothing about his upbringing that suggested a future in the spotlight. He was not chasing a record deal, auditioning for talent scouts, or dreaming about a life on television. Instead, he built something quieter, a steady job, a home, and a life wrapped around routine and community. For more than 2 decades, Goodall worked as a custodian for the Vigo County School Corporation, moving between several schools over the years before settling in at West Vigo Middle School, and later working across the district for a stretch that eventually totaled 25 years of service. To the students who passed him in the hallway every morning, he was not an aspiring performer. He was simply Richard, the friendly man who kept the building running, who greeted kids by name, and who could often be heard singing quietly to himself while he wiped down cafeteria tables or waxed a stretch of hallway floor. Music, though, had never been separate from his life. Long before any of the world outside Terre Haute knew his name, Goodall was already a singer in every sense that mattered to him personally. He performed in gospel trios around town, sang karaoke with friends, and treated music the way many people treat a beloved hobby, something that fed his spirit without needing anyone else's approval. Those who heard him back then would later say his voice never quite matched the size of the rooms he was singing in. It was too big, too rich, too full of feeling for a church basement or a karaoke bar. Part of what made his voice so unexpected was how ordinary the rest of his life looked from the outside. He was not the kind of person who talked about his singing as a calling or a career he was chasing. It was simply woven into his days, the same way another person might hum along to the radio during a commute. Colleagues at the schools where he worked would later describe him as someone who treated singing the way most people treat breathing, an automatic response to being alive, not a performance meant for an audience. That quality, the total absence of self-promotion, is exactly what made strangers online respond to him so strongly once they finally heard him. That contradiction, an enormous voice living inside an unassuming daily routine, is exactly what made the video that changed everything so irresistible when it finally appeared online. In 2022, a student filmed Goodall singing Journey's "Don't Stop Believin'" in a school hallway and posted the clip without asking his permission. The video spread with startling speed. Within days, national outlets including Fox News and ABC News had picked up the story, and comment sections filled with strangers marveling at the janitor with the arena-sized voice. Even television personality Howie Mandel took notice of the clip, publicly suggesting that a talent like this belonged on a much bigger stage than a school cafeteria. What made the moment even more striking was how little Goodall seemed to expect from it. He had not filmed the video himself, had not planned to post it anywhere, and had no way of controlling how far it traveled once it left his hands. For a man who had spent years quietly performing for gospel congregations and karaoke crowds without any real ambition toward wider recognition, waking up to find his name circulating in national headlines was disorienting in a way that fame rarely is for people who spend years actively pursuing it. He had not built a following. A following had simply found him. Goodall, for his part, did not treat the sudden attention as a launching pad. He went back to work the next day in the same uniform, doing the same job he had done for years, largely unaware of how far that video would eventually travel. It was not his first attempt at a break, either. He had auditioned for The Voice at an earlier point in his life and heard nothing back, not even a callback. He absorbed that disappointment quietly and kept living his life, treating the silence as simply another chapter in a hobby that rarely rewards people who chase it too hard. It took 2 more years for the opportunity to actually knock. In 2024, producers from America's Got Talent reached out, inviting him to audition in Los Angeles. For a man who had never traveled west of the Missouri River and had never once boarded an airplane, the trip alone was an enormous leap into unfamiliar territory. When he finally stepped onto the AGT stage and sang "Don't Stop Believin'," the nerves that had visibly gripped him during his walk-on melted away the instant the music started. Judge Heidi Klum was moved enough to hit the golden buzzer, sending him directly to the live shows without another audition required. Simon Cowell later called it one of his favorite moments in the show's long history, even referring to Goodall as his personal hero. From there, Goodall approached every performance less like a competitor trying to win and more like a man who had been handed an unexpected gift. He carried an emotional cover of "How Am I Supposed to Live Without You?" through the quarterfinals, brought raw, driving energy to "Eye of the Tiger" in the semifinals, and delivered a finale performance that left much of the room in tears. When the season ended, Richard Goodall was named the winner of Season 19 of America's Got Talent, becoming the first vocalist to claim the title in 5 years after a stretch dominated by specialty acts. On television, it read like the perfect underdog story. Off camera, the real story ran far deeper and far heavier than anything the broadcast ever showed. Before Goodall ever became a household name, life had already tested him in ways audiences never saw. After the quiet disappointment of his voice audition, he found comfort performing with a small gospel group, a routine that gave his musical life structure and purpose outside of his day job. Then, almost overnight, the COVID-19 pandemic dismantled it. Venues closed, gatherings stopped, and the group he had leaned on for years simply came apart, taking with it one of the few spaces where his singing had felt fully understood. Far more devastating was what came next. In 2021, Goodall lost his first wife, Patty, to cancer. She had stood beside him through years of quiet disappointment and unmet dreams, and her death left a silence in his life that no amount of routine could fill. He kept showing up for work every morning, because that discipline was simply part of who he was. But those who knew him well could hear the weight sitting underneath his voice whenever he sang in the months that followed. That grief never fully disappeared. It became part of the emotional texture that would later move millions of strangers watching him on television, most of whom had no idea what he had actually lived through to get there. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from losing a spouse and still having to walk into the same building every morning, greet the same people, and perform the same tasks as though the ground underneath you had not just shifted completely. Goodall did not have the luxury of stepping away from his responsibilities to grieve privately. He mopped the same floors, wiped down the same tables, and clocked in and out on the same schedule, all while carrying a kind of sorrow that most of his co-workers likely never fully understood. Music, during that stretch, became less of a joy and more of an outlet, a way of processing something that words alone could not hold. When people later watched him perform ballads on national television and felt an ache they could not quite explain, they were likely responding, without realizing it, to years of unspoken loss finally finding a stage large enough to hold it. Life eventually offered him something he was not expecting to find again. He met a woman named Angie, and their relationship began long before any cameras or television contracts entered the picture. She knew him first as simply Richard, not as a viral clip or a future champion, and that distinction mattered enormously to him. As his America's Got Talent journey accelerated into something far bigger than either of them anticipated, Angie became the steady presence he leaned on, encouraging him through moments of doubt and reminding him that he deserved genuine happiness rather than fleeting attention. Their relationship moved quickly once it became clear how much they meant to each other. In September of 2024, just one day after Goodall performed in the AGT finals, and only days before the season's outcome would be revealed, the two were married in Pasadena, California. Goodall announced the news himself, writing on social media that as of 3 o'clock Pacific time, he and Angie were officially husband and wife. The following day, he shared more from their wedding, describing an evening spent with his AGT family before the couple enjoyed a quiet dinner together on the beach in Malibu. It was a decision made for entirely personal reasons, tucked quietly into one of the busiest weeks of his life, rather than staged as a moment for cameras. Goodall has repeatedly credited Angie as one of the biggest reasons he found the courage to keep pushing through the competition at all, and their partnership would go on to reshape another part of his life that he had carried unresolved since childhood. Angie's influence on Goodall's life went well beyond emotional support during his AGT run. She also encouraged him to finally explore a question he had carried quietly since he was a child: the identity of his biological parents. Goodall had been adopted as an infant and had grown up without any information about his birth family, a gap he had long since made peace with simply because he assumed it would never be answered. With Angie's encouragement, Goodall used an ancestry testing service to search for his biological father. The search led him to a man named Hubert, a retired K-9 police officer and Army veteran living in the Indianapolis area. What Goodall discovered was almost as remarkable as the reunion itself. Hubert had never known Goodall existed at all. According to Goodall, it was actually his father who recognized him first, having seen his face during his America's Got Talent run and suspecting a connection before either man had confirmed anything through the ancestry results. In August of 2025, Goodall shared the news publicly on Instagram, introducing Hubert to his fans in a heartfelt post. "My friends, I'd like to introduce an amazing man. His name is Hubert," he wrote, explaining that Hubert had no children of his own and had been stunned to learn, after all those decades, that he had a son after all. Goodall also revealed that the reunion uncovered something else entirely unexpected: siblings he had never known about, a brother and two sisters, suddenly adding new branches to a family tree he had assumed was permanently incomplete. For a man who had spent his whole life without answers about half of his own history, the discovery did not erase the years of quiet acceptance that came before it. Instead, it added something he had stopped expecting to ever receive: a living connection to the other side of his own story. Goodall has described meeting Hubert as one of the most meaningful moments of his adult life, a piece of belonging he did not realize he was still missing until Angie helped him go looking for it. Given the scale of his sudden fame, many assumed Goodall would immediately walk away from his custodial job and step full-time into music. That assumption turned out to be wrong, at least for a good while longer than most people expected. After winning season 19, Goodall simply went back to work, continuing to clean classrooms and hallways at West Vigo Middle School much like he always had. When asked why, his answer was straightforward. He genuinely loved the students, the staff, and the sense of structure the job had given him for more than 2 decades. His hometown embraced him just as fiercely in return. Terre Haute presented him with a key to the city, and West Vigo Middle School held an emotional pep rally in his honor, filled with cheering students and grateful staff celebrating one of their own. Local news outlets covered the celebration extensively, treating it less like a routine school event and more like a hometown parade. That support had actually begun even before he won anything. When AGT first required him to travel to Los Angeles for his audition, it was not network money or a corporate sponsor that got him there. Friends, neighbors, and strangers who had seen his viral video pooled their own money together to help fund the trip. New opportunities kept arriving even as he clocked in for his regular shifts. Goodall sang the national anthem at an Indiana Pacers game, opened for fellow AT judge Howie Mandel during a Las Vegas performance, and continued booking local shows around Indiana even as national attention followed him. In interviews, he spoke about the experience with the same humility that had defined him from the start, describing his win as something that felt like anyone's game rather than a guaranteed outcome, and explaining that his goal on stage was never really about winning. It was about people understanding how much singing meant to him, rather than rushing into a record deal or relocating to chase the industry. Goodall built his music career slowly and deliberately, staying rooted in the Terre Haute community that had supported him from the very beginning. In August of 2025, he released his debut single, "Long Time Coming," describing himself on social media as feeling like the luckiest man alive. Around the same period, he continued performing with a local group, Sugar Street, taking smaller regional gigs that let him grow as an artist without the pressure of a national spotlight. That August, Goodall also returned to the America's Got Talent stage for the show's 20th anniversary special, opening the night with a performance of Eye of the Tiger, and later performing alongside Journey guitarist Neil Schon during the season 20 finale, a full-circle moment tied directly back to the very song that started his entire journey. Through all of it, Goodall kept insisting that fame had not changed how people around him treated him day to day. Students and co-workers still saw him constantly, which he described as a relief rather than a letdown, since it kept the whole experience feeling like a normal part of his life rather than something separate from it. There is something worth sitting with in the sheer length of that overlap. Most people who experience a sudden, viral rise to fame treat their old life as something to leave behind as quickly as possible, a chapter to close the moment a bigger opportunity appears. Goodall did the opposite. He treated his job less like a stepping stone he had outgrown and more like a foundation he was not ready to abandon, even after achieving something as significant as a national television title. When asked directly about the decision to keep working, he did not describe it as caution or hesitation about his music career. He described it as loyalty, both to the people he worked alongside and to a version of himself that had never needed a stage to feel like his life had meaning. That mindset, more than any single performance, may be the clearest window into who Richard Goodall actually is underneath the viral clips and headlines. He also spoke candidly, in interviews throughout 2025, about the practical uncertainty of entertainment as a career path. Unlike a school custodial position, which came with a predictable paycheck, a pension, and decades of institutional stability, a music career offered no such guarantees. Concerts could sell out, or they could not. A single could resonate with an audience or disappear without notice. For a man who had spent his adult life valuing steadiness above almost everything else, walking away from that security was never going to be a decision made lightly, no matter how many people online were cheering him on to do it. For nearly 2 years after his AGT win, Goodall balanced two completely different lives, one behind a mop and one behind a microphone. In interviews throughout 2025, he made clear that he had no immediate plans to leave his job at the school, telling NBC Insider that things were happening behind the scenes, but that he intended to keep working until I can't anymore. As late as July of 2025, he was still posting photos of himself cleaning school cafeterias, captioning one snapshot simply, "Cafeteria getting some love today." That balance finally shifted in the summer of 2026. After 25 years of service across 4 different schools in the Vigo County School Corporation, Richard Goodall officially retired from his custodial position. He announced the decision on Instagram alongside a photo of his keys and staff identification card, reflecting on everything the job had meant to him. "Been through a lot at the Vigo County School Corporation," he wrote, recalling the countless children, parents, and grandparents he had come to know over a quarter-century of showing up to work. Goodall described the choice as emotional rather than easy. In earlier interviews, he had explained that stepping away from a steady paycheck to fully commit to entertainment felt genuinely frightening, since the entertainment world offers nowhere near the same stability as a long-term public school position. Colleagues and community members responded with an outpouring of support, flooding his social media with congratulations and well wishes, thanking him for more than 2 decades of quiet dedication to their schools. Alongside the retirement came another announcement few had seen coming. Goodall signed a deal with producer Ben Everard of Everard Entertainment, known for projects including the film Yes Day, to develop a feature film based on his life story. According to Goodall, Everard reached out to him through a connection tied to AGT judge Howie Mandel, drawn to the idea that his journey, from janitor to national champion to a man reuniting with a father he never knew, was almost too remarkable not to put on screen. A screenwriter has already been brought on, and Goodall has said the finished script is currently being shopped to agents, directors, and potential cast members, though no timeline or casting decisions have been made public. True to his character, Goodall said he is largely letting the producers take the lead, adding that if the film comes together, he considers it a flattering bonus, and if it does not, he is simply along for the ride either way. Even with a film deal in motion and a growing music career pulling him in new directions, Goodall has continued performing close to home. His schedule throughout 2026 included local and regional shows around Indiana, performances tied to community celebrations, and continued work with his band Sugar Street, the same group that gave him a low-pressure space to keep developing as an artist away from the spotlight of national television. He performed internationally as well, taking part in a concert overseas, while still returning to smaller Indiana venues and community festivals that had supported him long before any producer ever picked up the phone. Goodall has been candid about the fact that the film project remains a work in progress, with no confirmed release date, cast, or director attached as of the announcement. He described the process as slower than outsiders might expect, noting that nearly 2 years passed between his AGT win and the point where the deal with Everard Entertainment became public. Rather than rushing to capitalize on the attention, he has approached the entire process with the same patience that defined his music career, letting professionals handle the business side while he focuses on the performing he has always loved. When asked what he hoped audiences would take from a potential film, Goodall said simply that he wanted it to encourage other people to share whatever talent they were sitting on, no matter how ordinary their daily life might look from the outside. Looking back across everything that has happened since a student's phone camera first caught him singing in a school hallway, Richard Goodall's journey reads less like a lucky break and more like decades of quiet persistence finally catching up with him all at once. He lost a wife far too soon, found a father he never knew existed, married the woman who helped him find that missing piece of his history, and spent 25 years showing up for a job that never once demanded fame from him. At 56 years old, Goodall has finally stepped fully away from the mop and the uniform that defined so much of his adult life, choosing instead to bet everything on the music and the storytelling opportunities that grew out of one unplanned viral video. He still describes himself, by his own account, as simply a regular guy who happened to get the chance of a lifetime, adding that nobody could have invented a story quite like his own even if they had tried. From a quiet hallway in Terre Haute to a Hollywood film deal in development, Richard Goodall's story has never really been about a talent show. It has been about grief, family, patience, and the kind of ordinary discipline that, every once in a while, turns out to be extraordinary after all. It is worth remembering that none of this was inevitable. A different person might have quit the moment the first audition went nowhere. A different person might have leaned harder into the fame the instant the viral video hit, chasing every camera and every headline before the moment cooled off. Goodall did neither. He kept mopping floors after the video went viral. He kept mopping floors after the golden buzzer. He kept mopping floors for 2 more years after winning the entire competition, walking away only when he felt, in his own words, that the timing finally made sense. That kind of restraint is rare in an era built around instant reinvention, and it may be the single quality that made his story resonate as deeply as it did. What comes next for Richard Goodall remains genuinely open. A film is somewhere in development. An album may follow the momentum of his debut single. More stages, bigger or smaller, will likely keep finding him the way the very first one did, almost by accident. But whatever happens next, the foundation underneath it was built over 25 years of showing up to an unglamorous job, loving the people in that building, and treating his voice as something to be shared quietly rather than sold loudly. That, more than any golden buzzer, may be the real reason his story never stopped feeling honest. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe for more real stories worth telling.